A black woman opens a new restaurant in town, and a racist white woman who owns a successful restaurant thinks that black food is disgusting, and the new restaurant opened by the black woman will never be successful. However, the white woman is shocked the next time she walks into her own restaurant. The soft glow of warm lights spilled out of Soul's Delight, drawing people in, like moths to a flame. Alana Jenkins stood at the counter, her face calm, but her hands busier than ever. The clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation filled the restaurant as plates of collard greens, fried catfish, and cornbread made their way to eager customers. The opening night was a success. People smiled as they bit into dishes filled with soul and history, chatting about the unique flavors, the care, and the ma. Sharon Lewis, Alana's sous chef, popped her head out of the kitchen, a grin wide across her face. "Full house," she said, wiping her brow. "You should be proud, boss. This is a hit." Alana gave a small nod, her eyes scanning the tables. "It's a good start," she replied. Her voice was steady, but inside she felt a mix of relief and excitement. She'd worked hard for this night. For years she'd dreamed of sharing the food of her ancestors, her people, with the world. And now, that dream was alive. Suddenly the chatter died down for a moment, and the front door creaked open. A cold breeze swept through the room as a woman stepped inside, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. Emma Harper. Alana recognized her immediately. Owner of La Bonne Cuisine, the fancy French restaurant across the street, the one everyone talked about. Emma's eyes scanned the room, her lips pressing into a tight line. She wore a tailored cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Alana's entire opening week budget. Her steps were slow and deliberate as she approached the counter, her presence demanding attention even without a word. The restaurant went quiet, eyes flicking between Alana and Emma as the air thickened with tension. Sharon ducked back into the kitchen, but Alana stood her ground, her posture straight and professional. Emma reached the counter and glanced around, as if the place offended her. "So," she began, her voice sharp but polite. "This is Soul's Delight," Alana nodded. "It is. Welcome." Emma didn't smile. She looked at the menu, her nose wrinkling slightly. "I'm surprised you even opened here. I mean, this town isn't exactly the place for this type of cuisine." She waved a hand dismissively at the dishes being served. Alana kept her face neutral. People seemed to be enjoying it. Emma's eyes flickered toward the busy tables, but she quickly returned her gaze to Alana. "For now. But let's be honest." She leaned in slightly, her voice lowering. "Restaurants like this don't last. People around here want refinement, class, not fried food." Alana stayed quiet for a moment, taking in Emma's words. She could feel the stares of her customers, the tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. But instead of anger, Alana felt a calmness wash over her. She'd expected something like this. "Thank you for the advice," Alana said softly, her tone measured. "But I believe people will decide for themselves what they want." Emma straightened up, her face hardening. "I'm just trying to help. It would be a shame to see all this hard work go to waste. I've seen places like this open and close in a matter of months. Maybe you should think about cutting your losses before it's too late." Sharon stepped out from the kitchen again, overhearing the exchange. She shot a glare at Emma but didn't say a word. The customers who had been quietly watching began whispering amongst themselves, a few shaking their heads in disapproval of Emma's comments. Alana met Emma's gaze, unblinking. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm confident that Soul's Delight will be just fine." Emma's lips curled into a small, tight smile. "We'll see," she said, turning sharply on her heel. The clacking of her heels echoed through the restaurant as she made her way to the door, leaving the warmth of Soul's Delight behind. As the door closed behind her, the noise in the restaurant gradually returned to normal, but there was a lingering sense of discomfort. Sharon came up beside Alana, arms crossed. "What's her problem?" she muttered. "Does she think she's the only one allowed to have a restaurant in this town?" Alana let out a small breath. "She's scared," she said, her voice low. "But we're not here for that," Sharon snorted. "Well, she better get used to it. People love this food, and we're not going anywhere." Alana smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Let's just focus on what we do best, Sharon," she said, turning back to the kitchen. "That's all we can do." As Alana walked back toward the stove, the clinking of plates and hum of conversation filled the air again. But in the back of her mind, Emma's words lingered like a bitter taste she couldn't quite shake. Emma Harper sat at the bar of La Bonne Cuisine, tapping her manicured fingers lightly against the gleaming surface. The restaurant was unusually quiet for a Thursday evening, with only a few scattered patrons dining. The low murmur of conversation seemed distant, swallowed by the empty tables and the soft clinking of silverware. She glanced at the reservation book sitting in front of her. The pages looked far too empty for her comfort. 3 reservations for the evening, compared to the usual dozen or more. It didn't make sense. She had built this place to be the premier dining experience in town. People had always flocked to La Bonne Cuisine for fine French cuisine, for the ambiance, the class. Yet here she was, watching it slowly slip away. Behind the bar, John Harper dried a wine glass with a towel, his movements slow and deliberate. He had been watching Emma's growing frustration for weeks now, but he hadn't said much about it. He knew better than to stir that particular pot. Still, he could feel the tension in her every movement, the way she sat a little too stiffly, her eyes flicking toward the door every few minutes as if expecting a wave of customers to rush in and save the night. But the door stayed still. Finally, John spoke up, his voice casual but careful. "It's been slow for a while now," he said, setting the glass down on the counter. "Maybe we should take a look at what's going on." Emma's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't look at him. "It's just a phase," she replied, her tone clipped. "Every restaurant has ups and downs." John sighed softly. "It's been more down than up lately, and people are talking. Seems like that new place across the street is pulling in a lot of attention." Emma's head snapped toward him, her eyes sharp. "Soul's Delight?" she said, practically spitting the name out. "That place is a joke. It's a novelty. People are just curious. It won't last." "Maybe," John replied, leaning against the bar. "But they're getting more customers than us right now. I've heard some folks around town say they really like what Alana's doing over there." Emma's lips thinned. The name Alana irritated her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. The thought that this newcomer, with her soul food, could be seen as competition was laughable. Emma had built La Bonne Cuisine from the ground up, turning it into the most respected restaurant in town. She had the experience, the connections. She understood what fine dining was supposed to be. What could Soul's Delight possibly offer that La Bonne Cuisine couldn't? "Let them talk," Emma muttered, her voice icy. "It won't be long before they get bored of that place and come back to where they belong." John gave her a long look, then shook his head. "You're too focused on that place, Emma. Maybe it's time to try something different. Adapt a little. Look at what people are enjoying about their experience over there." Emma turned to face him fully now, her eyes flashing. "You want me to adapt? To what? Serve fried chicken and greens? We don't need to lower our standards just because some people have suddenly developed a taste for cheap comfort food." John's expression remained calm, but he didn't back down. "It's not about lowering standards. It's about keeping up with what people want. Food isn't just about the meal. It's about the experience, the atmosphere. Maybe we've gotten a little too stiff here." "Stiff?" Emma repeated, incredulous. "You think La Bonne Cuisine has a problem with its atmosphere?" John raised an eyebrow. "I think it wouldn't hurt to make some adjustments. People are changing. The town's changing. You can either change with it, or you can get left behind." Emma fell silent, her jaw tight. She turned back to the reservation book, staring at the blank spaces as if willing them to fill up. She didn't need John to tell her what she already knew. Things had been slow. And the worst part was, people were talking about Soul's Delight. She'd overheard them herself, casual mentions of how welcoming the place felt, how the food had a kind of heart to it that they hadn't expected. She didn't understand it. How could something as basic as soul food, something she had always seen as unsophisticated, pull people away from her carefully curated fine dining experience? But John was wrong. She wasn't going to change anything. She had built this restaurant on the principles of excellence and refinement, and she wasn't going to tarnish that just because the town had developed a passing fascination with something new. They'd come back. They always did. "I'll handle this," Emma said finally, her voice sharp with finality. "We don't need to change anything." John watched her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "All right, but you might want to start paying attention to what's happening, or there might not be much left to handle." Emma didn't respond. She didn't need his advice. La Bonne Cuisine would survive. It always had. As John turned to greet a customer at the bar, Emma glanced out the window across the street. She could see the bright, welcoming lights of Soul's Delight glowing in the distance. People were still pouring in, laughing, chatting, enjoying themselves. The sight left a sour taste in her mouth. With a hard look at the empty tables of her own restaurant, Emma pressed her lips together. She wouldn't let this continue for much longer. Soul's Delight might be the new talk of the town, but Emma Harper had been here for years, and she wasn't about to be pushed aside. The sweet, savory smell of frying catfish filled the air as Alana Jenkins stood by the pass, carefully plating her latest creation. The kitchen of Soul's Delight was alive with the familiar rhythms of a bustling night. Sizzling pans, the low hum of the fryer, and the occasional burst of laughter from the dining room outside. Every table was full, and more customers stood near the entrance, waiting for their turn to enjoy a meal. Sharon was moving quickly, pulling cornbread fresh from the oven, her smile wide as she slid a tray of golden brown squares onto the counter. "Alana, we've got another batch ready. We're gonna need it tonight. People are asking for seconds on the cornbread alone." Alana smiled as she wiped the edge of the plate with a cloth, making sure every detail was perfect before sending it out. Good, she said, glancing through the kitchen window to the dining room. Let's keep it going. The crowd's looking happy. The restaurant hummed with energy, the chatter of diners mixing with the soft jazz playing overhead. The tables were filled with people from all walks of life, families, couples, a few groups of friends. It wasn't just the usual crowd of locals either. Word was spreading, and Alana could see some new faces tonight. She watched as a man at one of the tables took his first bite of her collard greens and closed his eyes, a look of pure satisfaction spreading across his face. His wife laughed softly, watching him. "I told you," she said, nudging him. "Didn't I say this place would be good?" He nodded, still chewing before responding. "You didn't say it'd be this good," he said, his voice filled with amazement. "I've never had anything like this before." Alana's smile widened. It was moments like these that reminded her why she had opened Soul's Delight in the first place. She wanted to bring something unique to the table, something rooted in tradition but elevated for today's diners. She wasn't just cooking food. She was sharing a piece of herself, her culture, her history. Sharon stepped beside her, catching a glimpse of the dining room. "You seeing this? That's another table full of people who used to eat across the street," she said, her voice low, but with a hint of pride. "Looks like they've switched sides for good." Alana's gaze flicked over to the group Sharon had pointed out. She recognized a few of them, regulars at Cuisine. They were the kind of customers who used to praise Emma's restaurant as the pinnacle of fine dining in the town. Now, here they were, laughing and enjoying themselves over plates of fried chicken, mac and cheese, and sweet potato pie. One of the women at the table leaned back in her chair, smiling as she spoke to the group. "I'm telling you, it's not just the food. It's the whole atmosphere. You walk in here and it just feels different, comfortable, like you're home." Her friend nodded in agreement. "Exactly. I love Cuisine, but there's something special here. It feels more authentic, more real." Alana didn't need to hear anymore. She knew what they meant. It wasn't just the food that was drawing people in. It was the warmth, the feeling of being welcomed into something familiar and genuine. She had created a space where people could relax, be themselves, and enjoy food that made them feel connected, not just to a restaurant, but to something deeper. Sharon grinned beside her. "You hear that, boss? Authentic. That's what we are. That's why they keep coming back." Alana nodded, though she didn't let the success distract her from the work at hand. "Let's keep it that way," she said, her voice firm. "We do what we do best, one plate at a time." The night wore on, and the flow of customers didn't slow down. By the time the last table was served, Alana and her staff were exhausted, but satisfied. The restaurant had been packed from the moment they opened to the last hour, and the feedback was nothing but glowing. As they began to clean up, Sharon leaned against the counter, wiping her forehead. "Another full night. I can't believe how fast we've grown," she said, her tone a mix of pride and disbelief. "Alana, you're a genius." Alana shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. "Not a genius, just doing what I love. People respond to that." Sharon chuckled. "Well, whatever you're doing, it's working. I heard some of the folks out there talking about how they used to go to Cuisine every week. Now they're saying this is their new spot." Alana's expression softened, but she remained thoughtful. "It's not about taking their customers," she said quietly. "It's about giving people something they want, something they didn't know they were missing." Sharon raised an eyebrow. "You think Emma's worried?" Alana didn't respond right away. She knew Emma Harper was watching. She had felt the tension every time she passed by Cuisine on her way to work. The empty tables visible through the windows, Emma standing behind the counter, her eyes sharp and calculating. But Alana wasn't focused on that. She had her own path, her own goals. "I don't know if she's worried," Alana said finally, "but that's not my concern. We're here to do our thing, and we're doing it well. That's all that matters." Sharon nodded, a satisfied smile on her face. "Damn right." As they wrapped up for the night, Alana stood by the front door, taking a moment to breathe in the success. She glanced across the street at Cuisine. The lights were dim, the restaurant nearly empty. Alana's focus shifted back to her own place, her heart full but steady. She wasn't here to compete. She was here to create something meaningful, something real. And as long as she stayed true to that, she knew Soul's Delight would keep thriving. The door chimed as the last customer left, waving goodbye to Alana with a smile. "See you next week," they called out. Alana smiled back. "Looking forward to it," she said softly. As the door closed behind them, the restaurant fell quiet, the echoes of the night still lingering in the air. Alana stood for a moment, taking it all in, before turning off the lights and heading into the kitchen to join her staff. Tomorrow was a new day, and there was work to be done. Emma Harper stood in the dimly lit dining room of La Bonne Cuisine, staring out the large front window at the street below. It was another quiet night, too quiet. Only a few tables were filled, scattered with small groups of diners, mostly older regulars who had been coming for years. She could hear the soft clink of cutlery and murmured conversation, but it didn't fill the space like it used to. Across the street, the lights of Soul's Delight shone brightly. Through the windows, she could see the steady stream of customers entering and exiting, the sound of laughter and lively conversation leaking through the glass like a taunt. Emma's lips tightened into a thin line. It had been weeks since Soul's Delight opened, and business at La Bonne Cuisine hadn't just slowed, it had plummeted. She didn't understand it. How could a place that served fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread, soul food, be drawing in more customers than her fine French restaurant, a place with years of accolades and reputation behind it? She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see John approaching. He looked tired, his sleeves rolled up as he wiped his hands on a towel. The kitchen staff was reduced to skeleton numbers lately, and even he had been pitching in, something that never used to happen. "You should sit down, Emma. Take a break," John said, his voice gentle but firm. "You've been staring out that window for half the night." "I'm fine," Emma replied curtly, brushing him off. She turned back toward the window, her gaze once again locked on the bright and bustling scene across the street. "They're packed again. Look at them. What is it about that place?" John sighed and leaned against the bar. "I've been trying to tell you for weeks, Ev. It's not just about the food. It's the whole experience. People feel comfortable there. They feel welcome. It's not all about the fanciest dish." Emma shot him a glare. "Are you saying people don't feel welcome here? That's ridiculous. La Bonne Cuisine has been the best restaurant in town for years. People love it here." "People used to love it," John corrected. "But maybe they're looking for something different now." "Times change, Emma." Emma's nostrils flared. "Times may change, but standards shouldn't. I've built this restaurant on quality, refinement, class. I won't lower it to cater to people's latest cravings for comfort food." John straightened up, folding his arms across his chest. "No one's asking you to lower your standards, but you can't ignore what's happening around you. You're losing business, Emma. This isn't just a rough patch. It's a real problem." Emma's jaw clenched. She didn't need to be told that. She could see the empty tables, feel the weight of the unsold ingredients stacking up in the kitchen. But she refused to believe that people preferred Soul's Delight to La Bonne Cuisine. It didn't make sense. Her eyes drifted back to the window, narrowing as she watched the line outside Alana's restaurant. "It's a fad," she muttered, half to herself. "People are just curious. It'll wear off soon enough, and then they'll come back to real food, to real dining." John was quiet for a moment, watching her carefully. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, almost sad. "You really think that's all this is? A fad?" Emma didn't answer, her gaze still fixed on the street. John sighed again, running a hand through his graying hair. "I think you're too focused on them," he said quietly. "You're letting Soul's Delight get in your head, and it's affecting everything we do here. Maybe instead of worrying about what Alana's doing, we should focus on what we're doing." Emma whipped around, her face a mask of frustration. "And what do you suggest? That we start serving fried chicken? That we turn La Bonne Cuisine into a barbecue joint?" She shook her head, her voice rising. "I've worked too hard to let this place become just another casual eatery. We have standards, John. No one's asking you to serve fried chicken," John said evenly, holding her gaze. "But maybe we should be thinking about what people are looking for right now. They want more than just a meal. They want an experience. Something real, something warm. Maybe we've lost a bit of that." Emma opened her mouth to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. She hated to admit it, but there was something about what John said that stung. She didn't want to believe that they'd lost touch with their customers, but the evidence was there. People were choosing Soul's Delight over La Bonne Cuisine, and that reality was impossible to ignore. But she wasn't ready to back down, not yet. "I don't need to change," she said finally, her voice cold. "I'm not going to cheapen this restaurant just to compete with that. People will come back. They always do." John gave her a long, searching look, then shook his head. "I hope you're right, Emma," he said quietly. "But I think you're underestimating what's happening here." Before she could respond, the door to the restaurant opened, and a couple walked in. Emma's head snapped toward them, her frustration momentarily forgotten as she put on her most welcoming smile. "Good evening," she said, her voice a bit too bright. "Table for two?" The couple nodded, though their expressions were reserved. Emma led them to a table, her movements quick and efficient. As she seated them, she noticed their glances toward the window, toward Soul's Delight. "Have you dined with us before?" Emma asked, trying to sound cheerful. "Once? A while back?" the woman replied. "We usually go to the new place across the street now, but they were packed tonight." Emma's smile faltered, just for a second. Ah, she said, regaining her composure. Well, we're delighted to have you here this evening. As she walked back to the bar, the anger simmered under her calm exterior. Even when people came into Le Bon Cuisine, they were still thinking about Soul's Delight. It was infuriating. John gave her a knowing look, but said nothing. Emma didn't need to hear his gentle warnings again. She would not give in to the idea that Soul's Delight was some unbeatable force. No matter what people said or where they went, Le Bon Cuisine was the best restaurant in town. It always had been. It always would be. But as she stared out the window once more, watching the lively crowd across the street, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away from her, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she could get it back. The Saturday night rush at Soul's Delight was in full swing. The warm, comforting smell of fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread filled the air as the restaurant bustled with activity. Alana moved quickly between the kitchen and the dining room, checking on tables, smiling at customers, and making sure everything was running smoothly. Sharon was behind the counter, helping with orders, her energy high as always. "I can't believe how packed we are again," she said to Alana, sliding a tray of plates toward a server. "Every table, every night. It's crazy." Alana gave a small smile, her eyes scanning the room. "It's good, Sharon. We've built something here." The door chimed as more customers entered, laughter spilling in with the cool night air. Alana turned toward the entrance, ready to greet them, but her smile faltered when she saw who had just walked in. Emma Harper stood in the doorway, her face pale and tight with barely contained fury. Dressed in her usual crisp suit, she looked out of place in the lively, welcoming atmosphere of Soul's Delight. The room seemed to quiet slightly, the hum of conversation dipping as people glanced in her direction. The tension was immediate, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the evening. Alana's chest tightened, but she kept her expression calm. She knew Emma had been struggling. She'd heard the whispers, seen the empty tables at Le Bon Cuisine from across the street, but she hadn't expected Emma to show up here. Not like this. Sharon noticed too, and her eyes narrowed. "Oh, great. What's she doing here?" she muttered under her breath. "She's gonna cause a scene." Alana held up a hand to silence her. "Let's see what she wants," she said softly, but her stomach churned. She had a feeling this wouldn't end well. Emma strode across the dining room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her eyes swept over the packed tables, her lips pressed into a thin line as she took in the scene. The full house, the laughter, the plates piled high with food that Emma had always considered beneath her. Every step seemed to make her anger grow. Finally, she reached the counter where Alana stood. The room had fallen almost completely silent now, with customers watching the tense exchange. Emma didn't waste any time. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat, her voice low but sharp. "You think this little place is going to last?" Alana's face remained calm, though inside she felt a prickle of unease. "Emma, I don't know what you're talking about. We're just trying to run a business here, like anyone else." Emma's eyes flashed. "You're stealing my customers," she hissed, her voice rising. "I've seen them. People who used to come to Le Bon Cuisine every week are sitting at your tables now, eating this cheap food. And you're proud of that?" A few gasps came from nearby tables, and Alana could feel the eyes of her staff and customers on her, waiting for her response. She kept her voice steady, refusing to be rattled. "People are free to eat where they want, Emma. No one's stealing anything. If they like what we're doing here, that's their choice." Emma's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Their choice?" she repeated, her voice shaking with rage. "Do you have any idea how long I've been running Le Bon Cuisine? How hard I've worked to build it into the best restaurant in this town? And now you think you can waltz in here with your fried food and take that from me?" Sharon stepped forward from behind the counter, her eyes blazing. "She's not trying to take anything from you, Emma. She's doing her thing, just like you've been doing yours for years. Maybe it's time you stop blaming us for your problems." Emma shot her a withering glare. "Stay out of this," she snapped. "This isn't your fight." Alana placed a hand on Sharon's arm, gently pulling her back. She turned her attention back to Emma, her voice calm but firm. "Emma, you're upset, and I understand that. But coming in here and causing a scene isn't going to help either of us. If you have something to say, we can talk about it privately." Emma's face flushed with anger, her voice rising even more. "Talk privately? You think I want to talk to you? You don't deserve to be here, Alana. You in this place. It's a joke. You don't belong in the same conversation as Le Bon Cuisine." The room was dead silent now, all eyes on the two women. Alana felt a wave of heat rise in her chest, but she forced herself to stay composed. She wouldn't give Emma the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. "If that's how you feel, Emma," Alana said, her voice steady, "then maybe you should leave." Sharon stepped forward again, this time more forcefully. "Yeah, you heard her. It's time for you to go. This isn't your playground, and no one's interested in your tantrum. A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd of customers, and several people shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with Emma's outburst. Emma's face twisted with fury. "You all think you're so much better, don't you?" she shouted, her voice shaking with rage. "You think this place is something special? It's not. It's just a cheap imitation of what real dining is supposed to be." Before Alana could respond, one of the customers, an older man sitting near the front, stood up. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "you need to leave. We came here for a good meal, not to listen to this nonsense." Several other customers nodded in agreement, and a few stood up, ready to help if needed. Emma's face went pale as she realized she was losing the room. She opened her mouth to argue, but the weight of the moment seemed to press down on her. For a moment, her eyes met Alana's, and in that brief silence, Alana saw something flicker in Emma's gaze, something beyond anger. It looked almost like fear. Without another word, Emma turned sharply and stormed out of the restaurant, her heels clacking loudly on the floor. The door slammed shut behind her, and the sound echoed through the room. For a few seconds, the restaurant remained silent, the tension still lingering in the air. Then slowly, the chatter resumed, the customers shaking off the awkwardness of the moment and returning to their meals. Sharon let out a low whistle. "Well, that was something," she muttered, shaking her head. "I knew she was losing it, but I didn't think she'd come in here and blow up like that." Alana sighed, feeling the weight of the confrontation settle on her shoulders. "She's scared, Sharon," she said quietly. "She's losing everything she's worked for, and she doesn't know how to handle it." Sharon snorted. "She doesn't know how to handle the fact that we're better than her, is what it is." Alana shook her head. "It's not about being better. It's about doing what we do. Let's just focus on that." Sharon nodded, though her expression remained tense. "Yeah, you're right, but I swear if she comes in here again, she won't," Alana interrupted softly. "Not after tonight." As the restaurant slowly returned to normal, Alana turned her attention back to her customers, offering smiles and quiet reassurances that everything was fine. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the look in Emma's eyes just before she left. The fear, the desperation. Alana didn't want to see Emma fall apart, but she couldn't help but feel like that was exactly what was happening, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The next morning, the soft hum of early morning traffic drifted through the street as Alana unlocked the front door of Soul's Delight. The sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow on the tables and the neatly arranged chairs. The restaurant was quiet now, a stark contrast to the chaotic night before. She had barely gotten any sleep, her mind replaying the confrontation with Emma, the anger, the frustration. It had all been so raw, so uncontained. Alana couldn't shake the image of Emma's face, twisted with fear and desperation, as she had stormed out of the restaurant. Sharon was already in the kitchen, prepping for the day. The clatter of pots and pans echoed softly in the background, a familiar and comforting sound. "You all right, boss?" Sharon called out from the back. "You've been quiet this morning. Still thinking about last night?" Alana shook her head as she walked toward the counter, though the thoughts still lingered. "I'm fine. Just want to get everything ready for today." "Good," Sharon said, her voice muffled by the sound of chopping vegetables. "'Cause we're about to have another full house tonight." Words spreading even faster after last night. People love the drama. Alana sighed, not thrilled by the idea that her success was being linked to Emma's breakdown, but she pushed the thought aside. Let's just focus on the food. That's what really matters. Suddenly, the door chimed. Alana looked up, expecting one of the staff, or maybe an early delivery, but instead, Emma Harper stood in the doorway. Only this time, she looked nothing like the polished, confident woman who had stormed in the night before. Her crisp suit was gone, replaced by a simple sweater and slacks. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and her eyes, once sharp with pride, were red-rimmed and tired. She looked smaller, fragile even, as if the weight of everything had finally crushed her. Alana's breath caught for a moment, but she quickly composed herself. "Emma," she said, her voice calm but guarded. "What are you doing here?" Emma stepped inside, her movements slow and hesitant, completely different from her usual confident stride. She looked around the empty restaurant as if she was seeing it for the first time. "I need to talk to you," she said softly. Alana watched her carefully, noting the way Emma's hands fidgeted nervously, the way she avoided eye contact. Something was different, but Alana couldn't tell where this was going. "All right," she said, gesturing to a table. "We can talk." Emma shook her head. "Not here. It's too open." She cast a glance at the kitchen, where Sharon was still working, unaware of what was happening at the front. Alana sighed inwardly, but nodded. "We can talk in the back," she said, motioning toward the office at the rear of the restaurant. Once inside, Alana closed the door and turned to face Emma. The small office felt cramped with the tension hanging between them, the air heavy with unspoken words. Emma sank into the chair opposite Alana's desk, her posture slumped, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't speak for a moment, as if gathering the courage to say whatever she had come to say. Finally, she looked up at Alana and her voice cracked as she spoke. "I need your help." Alana blinked, taken aback. This was not what she had expected. "My help?" she echoed, her voice soft with surprise. Emma nodded, her eyes glassy. "La Bonne Cuisine, it's failing. People aren't coming anymore. My staff is quitting. I don't know what to do. I thought it was just a phase, but it's not. It's over. And She paused, her voice breaking as she fought to hold herself together. "I don't know how to fix it." Alana felt a strange mix of emotions swirl inside her. Pity, anger, and disbelief. She had never seen Emma like this, so vulnerable, so lost. The woman who had always seemed so in control, so confident, was now sitting before her, broken and pleading for help. Emma's gaze met Alana's, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "You were right, about everything. People don't want what I'm offering anymore. They want something real, something like what you've built here." Her eyes filled with tears, and she blinked them away quickly. "I was so focused on trying to hold on to what I had that I couldn't see what was changing around me, and now it's too late." Alana sat in silence, her heart heavy as she listened. She could hear the sincerity in Emma's voice, the desperation, but she also couldn't forget the hurtful words Emma had thrown at her, the way she had dismissed her work, her culture, her entire existence. Emma leaned forward, her voice trembling. "Please, Alana, I don't know who else to turn to. You know how to connect with people. You've built something that they love. Can you help me? Can you show me how to save my restaurant?" Alana stared at her, her mind racing. There was a part of her that wanted to say yes, to reach out and help this woman who was clearly drowning. But another part of her, a deeper, stronger part, knew that this wasn't her responsibility. Emma had come into Soul's Delight, time and time again, trying to tear down everything Alana had built. She had looked down on Alana's food, her culture, her success. Alana took a deep breath, her voice steady as she spoke. "Emma, I understand you're struggling. I understand how hard it is to see something you've worked for start to slip away, but I can't help you." Emma's eyes widened, her face pale. "What do you mean? You can't mean that." Alana shook her head, her voice firm but kind. "I mean, this isn't something I can fix for you. You've spent so long looking down on what we do here. You never cared about this place, about our food, about what it means to the people who come here. You just saw it as competition. And now, when things aren't going your way, you want me to help you? I'm sorry, Emma, but that's not how this works." Emma's face crumpled, and for a moment, Alana thought she might break down completely, but instead, she simply nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I understand." There was a long, heavy silence between them, the weight of years of tension finally settling into the space. Emma stood slowly, her movements stiff, her face drained of any emotion. She looked at Alana one last time, her eyes hollow. "I don't know what I'm going to do." Alana's heart clenched, but she remained firm. "I think you'll figure it out, Emma, but I can't be the one to help you do it." Emma didn't respond. She turned and walked out of the office, her steps slow and defeated. The door clicked shut behind her, and Alana sat there, staring at the empty space where Emma had just been. Sharon poked her head in a few minutes later, concern etched on her face. "What was that about?" Alana sighed, leaning back in her chair. "She's losing everything." Sharon raised an eyebrow. "And she thought you could fix it?" Alana nodded. "Yeah," Sharon snorted. "She's got some nerve." Alana looked at her, a sad smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah, she does." As the morning light streamed through the window, Alana felt a strange sense of closure. She didn't feel triumphant or vindicated or even angry, just tired. The battle between her and Emma was over, and while Alana would keep moving forward, Emma would have to face the consequences of her own choices. A few months had passed since Emma had walked out of Soul's Delight, defeated and broken. The chill of early winter had settled into the town, with the streets lined with the bare branches of trees and the sharp bite of cold in the air. The warm, inviting lights of Soul's Delight still shone brightly, and the restaurant buzzed with life every evening. Alana was walking down the street one quiet afternoon before the dinner rush, the cold breeze biting at her cheeks. She glanced across the street, where La Bonne Cuisine had stood, proud and imposing, for years. But today, it looked different. The windows were dark, the elegant sign hanging over the door was gone, and the once pristine glass was now covered with brown paper. A large, "For Lease" sign was taped to the front window, standing starkly against the faded grandeur of the restaurant. Alana stopped in her tracks, staring at the building. For a moment, She just stood there, watching the empty space that had once been filled with so much activity, so much pride. La Bonne Cuisine, the crown jewel of Emma Harper's empire, was closed. And this time, it seemed for good. Sharon appeared beside her, carrying a box of fresh produce. She followed Alana's gaze across the street and shook her head, letting out a low whistle. "So, she's finally done, huh?" she said quietly. "I didn't think I'd actually see the day." Alana didn't respond right away. There was something surreal about seeing the restaurant closed like this. Emma's fierce pride, her refusal to change, had led her to this point. And now, La Bonne Cuisine, once the most celebrated restaurant in town, stood as an empty, silent reminder of what had been. Sharon set the box down and crossed her arms, watching Alana closely. "You all right?" Alana nodded slowly, but her gaze remained on the building. "Yeah, I'm all right," she said softly, though there was a strange feeling in her chest, something between sadness and inevitability. "I guess I always knew it would come to this, but it's different seeing it happen." Sharon snorted, her voice tinged with frustration. "I don't feel bad for her. She did this to herself. She treated you like dirt, tried to ruin everything you built. This is her own fault." Alana sighed, finally turning away from the empty restaurant. "I know," she said, her voice quiet, "but it's still hard to watch someone lose everything." Sharon raised an eyebrow, her tone sharp. "She didn't lose it, Alana. She threw it away. She had chances to change, to adapt, and she didn't. You tried to help her when she came to you, and she wouldn't even admit she was wrong until she had nothing left." Alana looked down at her feet, her breath visible in the cold air. "I know," she repeated, though her heart still felt heavy. "But it doesn't feel like a victory. It just feels sad." Sharon softened a little, placing a hand on Alana's shoulder. "You're a better person than most, Alana. That's why this place works. But you can't carry her burdens too. She made her choices." Alana nodded, but the weight of everything that had happened still lingered. She had never wanted to see Emma fail. She had only wanted to create something good, something meaningful, and she had succeeded. But the cost of that success, watching another woman lose everything, was bittersweet. The two women stood in silence for a moment, watching the empty building across the street. Then, Sharon broke the silence with a small laugh. "You know," she said, shaking her head, "I don't know why I'm surprised. I mean, you've been knocking it out of the park since day one." "She never stood a chance," Alana smiled softly. "It wasn't about knocking her out of the park, Sharon. It was just about doing what we do best." Sharon picked up the box again, her grin widening. "Yeah, and what we do best is apparently taking this town by storm." Alana laughed, but it was a quiet, subdued laugh. "We're just doing what we love." Sharon nodded as she hefted the box onto her shoulder. "And that's exactly why you're still standing here." And she's not. They turned and walked back toward Soul's Delight, the warmth of the restaurant visible from down the street. As they approached, Alana could hear the faint sound of jazz playing inside, and the familiar clinking of dishes as the staff prepared for another busy evening. A group of customers stood outside the door, laughing and chatting as they waited for their table. Alana's heart swelled a little as she watched them. This was what she had built, a place where people felt at home, where the food connected them not just to the present, but to their roots, to something deeper. As they walked through the door, the familiar warmth and energy of the restaurant embraced Alana. Sharon set the box on the counter and turned to Alana with a grin. "Another full house tonight?" Alana smiled, her heart lighter now. "Looks like it." Sharon gave her a playful nudge. "Here's to many more years of it, huh?" Alana glanced around the restaurant, taking in the sight of her staff working, the sound of the kitchen bustling, the customers settling into their seats. The lights above cast a warm glow over everything, a reminder of the love and care that had gone into every detail of Soul's Delight. She nodded, a quiet confidence in her voice. "We'll keep doing what we do best, one plate at a time." The restaurant buzzed with life, and as Alana looked out at the full tables, she felt a deep sense of peace. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about who was better or who had failed. It was about staying true to herself, to her food, to the people who came through her doors. And as the cold air of winter pressed against the windows, the warmth of Soul's Delight continued to glow, a beacon of resilience and love in the heart of the town. The days were growing shorter, and the crisp winter air had a bite to it now, but Soul's Delight remained as warm and inviting as ever. The restaurant was packed once again, the usual crowd filling every table, and the air inside was thick with the smell of slow-cooked greens, fried catfish, and sweet potato pie. Alana stood by the kitchen pass, watching the flow of dishes making their way to hungry customers. It had become a rhythm she loved, the clatter of plates, the hum of conversations, and the smiles that appeared after the first bite of a well-cooked meal. Her heart swelled with pride every time she saw people enjoying what they served. This wasn't just a restaurant. it was a community. Sharon bustled past, balancing a tray of drinks, her energy seemingly endless despite the long hours. "Full house again," she called out, shooting Alana a quick grin. "Feels like we haven't had a slow night in months." Alana smiled as she wiped her hands on a towel. "I'm not complaining. People seem to like what we're doing." Sharon laughed, placing the drinks on a table before returning to Alana's side. "Like it? They love it. You've built something incredible here, Alana." Alana's smile widened, but she remained humble. "It's not just me. It's all of us. We're doing this together." Sharon raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying the modesty. Yeah, you're the heart of this place, though. Don't forget that." Before Alana could respond, the door swung open, and a group of regulars walked in, laughing and chatting as they waved at the staff. Alana recognized them immediately, a family that had started coming in almost every week since they first tried her food. The sight of them made her chest tighten with gratitude. This was what she had always dreamed of, a place where people felt connected, where they could share a meal and feel like they were part of something bigger. The restaurant was full of moments like that now, families gathering, friends reconnecting, people finding joy and comfort in the food and atmosphere Alana had created. The noise, the warmth, the energy. It was everything she had wanted when she first opened Soul's Delight. And it was more than just a success. It was a home. As the night wore on, Alana found herself stepping outside for a brief moment of quiet. She leaned against the wall, the cold air refreshing against her skin. Across the street, the once grand La Bonne Cuisine stood dark and empty, a silent reminder of what used to be. Alana didn't linger on it. She wasn't interested in gloating, and she didn't feel the need to dwell on Emma's downfall. That chapter was over. What mattered now was the future, what she was building here, day by day. The door to Soul's Delight opened behind her, and Sharon stepped out, rubbing her hands together for warmth. "Taking a breather?" she asked, coming to stand beside Alana. "Yeah," Alana replied softly, watching the light spilling out from the windows. "Just needed a moment." Sharon nodded, following Alana's gaze across the street. "Still thinking about that place?" she asked, her tone softer now. Alana shook her head. "No, not really. It's done, you know. There's nothing left to think about." Sharon glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You're a good person, Alana. I'd still be angry if I were you. But not you. You just keep moving forward." Alana smiled, her breath visible in the cold air. "I'm not interested in holding on to grudges, Sharon. There's no point in that. We've got something good here. That's all I need to focus on." Sharon chuckled, nudging her gently with her elbow. "Well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. This place is going to keep growing. I can feel it." Alana turned to her, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. "Yeah, I think so too." The two women stood in silence for a moment, watching the soft glow of the restaurant's lights spill out into the cold night. Inside, the sound of laughter and conversation continued, the warmth and energy of the place a stark contrast to the chilly world outside. After a moment, Sharon grinned. "All right, back to work. We've got a full house in there and I'm not letting you slack off." Alana laughed, shaking her head as they both headed back inside. As soon as they stepped through the door, the comforting hum of the restaurant surrounded them once again. The smell of good food, the chatter of happy customers. It was all part of the magic they had created. As Alana moved through the dining room, checking on tables and greeting familiar faces, she felt a deep sense of peace settle in her chest. The battles she had fought, both with herself and with others, had led her to this place, a place she could be proud of. She had built Soul's Delight from the ground up, staying true to her vision, her culture, and her heart. And now, it was more than just a restaurant. It was a part of the community, a space where people could come together, laugh, eat, and connect. Sharon caught her eye from across the room and gave her a thumbs up, signaling that everything was running smoothly. Alana smiled to herself, her heart full. The night wore on, and as the last few customers finished their meals and made their way out the door, Alana stood by the window, watching the lights of the town twinkle in the distance. The cold air pressed against the glass, but inside, the warmth of Soul's Delight remained steady. Sharon came up beside her, hands on her hips. "Another good night," she said with satisfaction. Alana nodded, a quiet smile on her face. "Yeah, another good night." Sharon grinned and shook her head. "You ready for tomorrow? Looks like we've got another full booking." Alana turned to face her, her smile still soft but confident. "We'll keep doing what we do best, one plate at a time." And with that, Alana walked back toward the kitchen, ready to prepare for the next day, knowing that what she had built was strong, meaningful, and lasting.